Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinatha Shri Radha. Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Cham Vishnupad Param Savrajikacharya Shraddhara Shatta Swayangraya Sabhacharana Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Cham Vishnupad Param Savrajikacharya Shraddhara Shatta Swayangraya Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Raj Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Grantarachima Bhagavatam Ki Nitya Gaura Premanande Hare Hare Bol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, today we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 2, Remembrance of Lord Krishna, Text 7. Uddhava Uvacha Krishna Dyumani Nimlacha Krishna Dyumani Nimlacha Kirneshu Achagarenaha Kirneshu Achagarenaha Kim Nuna Kushalam Bruyam Kim Nuna Kushalam Bruyam Katastri Shrishu Griheshvaham Katashrishu Griheshvaham Uddhava Vacha Krishna Dyumani Nimlacha Kirneshu Achagarenaha Kim Nuna Kushalam Bruyam Kata Shrishu Griheshvaham Uddhava Vacha Krishna Dyumani Nimlacha Kirneshu Achagarenaha Kim Nuna Kushalam Bruyam Kata Shrishu Griheshvaham Uddhava Vacha Krishna Dyumani Nimlacha Kirneshu Achagarenaha Kim Nuna Kushalam Bruyam Kata Shrishu Griheshvaham Uddhava Vacha Krishna Dyumani Nimlacha Kirneshu Achagarenaha Kim Nuna Kushalam Bruyam Kata Shrishu Griheshvaham Artavat Uddhava Vacha Shri Uddhava said, Krishna Dyumani, the Krishna son, Nimlacha, having said, Kirneshu, being swallowed, Achagarena, by the great snake, Ha, in the past, Kim, what, No, else, Naha, our, Kushalam, welfare, Bruyam, may I say, Kata, gone away, Shrishu Griheshu, in the house, Aham, I. Translation and purport by Divine Grace of Acharya Bhaktivedanta Swami Isvaresvra Prabhu, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Shri Uddhava said, My dear Vidura, the son of the world, Lord Krishna, has set, and our house has now been swallowed by the great snake of time. What can I say to you about our welfare? Purport. The disappearance of the Krishna son may be explained as follows, according to the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Vidura was struck with great sorrow when he got the hint of the annihilation of the great Yadu dynasty, as well as of his own family, the Kuru dynasty. Uddhava could understand the grief of Vidura, and therefore he first of all wanted to sympathize with him by saying that after the sunset everyone is in darkness. Since the entire world was merged in the darkness of grief, neither Vidura nor Uddhava nor anyone else could be happy. Uddhava was as much aggrieved as Vidura, and there was nothing further to be said about their welfare. The comparison of Krishna to the sun is very appropriate. As soon as the sun sets, darkness automatically appears. But the darkness experienced by the common man does not affect the sun itself, either at the time of sunrise or of sunset. Lord Krishna's appearance and disappearance are exactly like that of the sun. He appears and disappears in innumerable universes, and as long as he is present in a particular universe, there is all transcendental light in that universe. But the universe from which he passes away is put into darkness. His pastimes, however, are everlasting. The Lord is always present in some universe, just as the sun is present in either the eastern or the western hemisphere. The sun is always present either in India or in America, but when the sun is present in India, the American land is in darkness, and when the sun is present in America, the Indian hemisphere is in darkness. As the sun appears in the morning and gradually rises to the meridian, and then again sets in one hemisphere while simultaneously rising in the other, so Lord Krishna's disappearance in one universe and the beginning of his different pastimes in another take place simultaneously. As soon as one pastime is finished here, it is manifested in another universe, and thus his Nitya Lila or eternal pastimes are going on without ending. As the sunrise takes place once in 24 hours, similarly the pastimes of Lord Krishna take place in a universe once in a daytime of Brahma, the account of which is given in the Bhagavad Gita as 4,300,000,000 solar years. But wherever the Lord is present, all his different pastimes are described in the revealed scriptures take place at regular intervals. As at sunset the snakes become powerful, thieves are encouraged, ghosts become active, the lotus becomes disfigured, and the Chakravarti laments. So with the disappearance of Lord Krishna, the atheists feel enlivened and the devotees become sorry. Om Gyanatim Nandasya Granchana Shalakaya Chaksharon Militam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manapashtam Stapatam Yena Bhotare Svaryam Rupakaram Mayam Darate Svaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttabarkamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakrachatam Sahakana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sachevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parichana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamshcha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gauranga Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Krishabhana Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Kriya Vancha Kalpatanubhashta Kripa Sindhu Bhavacha Patidanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam class. On this very auspicious day, today is the appearance day of Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj. I'm most unqualified to sit here, and especially senior devotees present. But I beg for your blessings that somehow I may be able to glorify Srimad Bhagavatam and then maybe a little bit on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also. So we are still in the beginning of this very beautiful chapter in 3rd canto, Remembrance of Lord Krishna, because otherwise 3rd canto is famous for heavy philosophical instructions by Lord Kapiladev, then at the end of the canto, and before that about different aspects of creation again described. Amaitya Rishitya Vidura, and so lots of philosophy and maybe sometimes a bit more difficult to perceive the nectar which is present in every syllable of Srimad Bhagavatam. But in this chapter it's very easy because it's directly, as we'll hear then, Uddhava describing the pastimes, like all the highlights of Krishna's pastimes briefly. First in Vrindavan and then outside Vrindavan as well. And so far we heard about how Vidura in the previous chapter posed the questions to Uddhava, and how now in the last several verses we heard about the reaction of Uddhava, of how he, being questioned about all these great devotees and Lord Krishna himself, that he went automatically into ecstasy, and actually described even to such an extent that he was actually not present there. He was in completely on the spiritual plane. He was in the spiritual world, but then being questioned by Vidura further, he came back, and in order to speak about Krishna, to answer to Vidura, and so we heard about like in yesterday's class from Isvaresvra Prabhu. He was especially speaking on this topic of smaranam, because we heard like in a previous purport also that Prabhupada explains that because Krishna is absolute, also everything related to him is absolute, and all the different processes of bhakti yoga as well. And this means that remembering Krishna has the same full potency of potential reciprocation between the Lord and his devotee, as much as if he is directly standing before a devotee. And so in that way, Uddhava actually, even though as we hear now about how deeply they were lamenting, actually they had the same intensity of being with Krishna simply by thinking of him. And particularly as we know actually in this way, as we see here in the mood of separation of Krishna, that actually is even more intense, as we know famously especially from the gopis, of course, in Vrindavan, that is why, that's actually the main reason why Krishna apparently leaves Vrindavan, in order to plunge all these highest devotees of him into the most intense, you can say, paradoxically, association with him, which is separation. Because in that way then the devotee even more intensely hankers to see Krishna directly and to serve him directly. But in that Krishna is also directly present, not externally visible, but they are united in the most intense love in that way. It's funny, it's paradoxical that now, even though Prabhupada stressed it in the purport before that it is non-different, smaranam, than from being directly present, but now in today's verse we hear how the first initial response from Uddhava, namely I'll read against the translation, that Sri Uddhava said, "My dear Vidura, the son of the world, Lord Krishna, has said, and our house is now being swallowed by the great snake of time. What can I say to you about our welfare?" So he's making the point here that there is not even a point about asking all about the welfare of all these personalities, as elaborately as Vidura did in the previous chapter, because if simply Krishna is not there, then there's no possibility of anyone's welfare, as the analogy he gives here is that of the sun. And Prabhupada explains in the purport that if there's no sunshine, then there's no question of seeing anything. There's simply darkness, and in the same way, if Krishna is not there, then there's nothing auspicious. So, but that's of course now a different angle of looking at it, because we know actually, for pure devotees like Uddhava, even if Krishna is not present, then he still remembers him, and in that way he's in the same intensity united with Krishna. So for such a pure devotee there's always all auspiciousness. But still, transcendentally they are in intense lamentation, in separation of Krishna. And of course for the rest of the world, it does make a big difference if Krishna is personally present or not, because simply the Lord's personal presence of course brings so much auspiciousness, and in that way Prabhupada describes about Yeah, like for example, Prabhupada says that he appears and disappears in innumerable universes, and as long as he is present in a particular universe, there is all transcendental light in that universe. But the universe from which he passes away is put into darkness. So, of course, it is significant, the Lord's Prakata Lila presence as well, as it was there 5,000 years ago. But paradoxically, at the same time, for pure devotees, it is they still have the full possibility of being with Krishna simply by remembering him, or by hearing of him, by chanting about him, or by any other of the processes in devotional service. And also, we know, of course, that Krishna, yes, he disappeared in that way, but then, of course, it's described in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam itself that when he disappeared, that how is he still present? And one form of that is Srimad Bhagavatam itself. Try to remember the verse. Krishna swadama bhagate yana dhanama jnanadibhisa. How would you translate? Dhamma jnanadibhisa. Kalanashtadishamesha purnanarkvatunoditaha. So, where it's described that when Krishna ascended back to his spiritual abode, that with him along went Dharma and Jnana, so all religious principles and transcendental knowledge, as Prabhupada explains in the Prabhupada today, it's all gone if Krishna is not there. It's all, the world is put into darkness, and we know now that was at the onset of Kali Yuga, in the age of which we are in now, which is the age of darkness, you can say, age of quarrel. And so Kalanash Tatishamvisha, thus all the people have lost their vision, but there is one light, and that is one actually like the sun, just like this, as brilliant as the sun, and that is the Srimad Bhagavatam. And of course also we know that the Lord is also present as the holy name, particularly now in this age, as he especially gave us access to as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 500 years ago. And of course also, as we discussed a little bit earlier when Vidura was traveling on pilgrimage before meeting Uddhava, that everywhere there he saw and worshipped Krishna in his different deity forms in all those temples, in all those places of pilgrimage. So also, of course, like here, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath, it's directly Radha Gopinath, Radha Krishna present here. Also, even as we might feel, or like coming with our conditioning, that it's not as potent as if we would be there in the spiritual world with Krishna, but actually it is. It's just up to us how much advantage we take of it, how qualified we are to get the reciprocation of the Lord, also even here in his deity form. And so Krishna, we know he is still present in many forms, but still of course we do discuss about especially how when he was present personally 5,000 years ago and displayed all those beautiful pastimes. And those pastimes, as Prabhupada mentions in Prabhupada, they are Nitya Lila, even those that he performs here. And how to understand that explains is that as any pastime that finishes here, he already performs in another universe, because we know even the material universes, the Brahmandas, they are also innumerable. So all the pastimes are always going on also in all the universes, even though it's only once in a day of Brahma, so once in 4.3 billion years. But there's innumerable universes, so it's always going on. Just as the sun sets in one place, it's rising at another place. And of course, another point Prabhupada makes here with the comparison with the sun is that the sun itself is never affected, it's never gone. But it's only the vision of the person in a particular place that his vision is limited, and so he's not able to perceive the sun. And that's the same with Krishna, that his pastimes go eternally on, even even like in any holy place, we know it's not the material world, it's an abode, it's a spiritual world. So the pastimes there also still go on eternally, but not perceivable for us. So that's from lack from our side, but never from Krishna's side. And in terms of remembrance of Smaranam, maybe come back to that. I'll now briefly read just a little bit of this book called Renunciation Through Wisdom, which is what Prabhupada already wrote while he was still in the Grihastha ashram and in Bengali, but His Holiness Bhakti Tara Maharaj compiled those and put them into a book with the help of other devotees. And what's this? I'll try. I'll just write a brief section where he glorifies his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, and where we also see the mood of a perfect disciple like Srila Prabhupada, perfect disciple and thus perfect guru, Jagat Guru to all of us, of this humility and so I'll just read a little bit. That's from the chapter The Science of Devotion. It's on page 68. So, therefore the reprobate's only means of any piety. So that's about where Prabhupada discusses that the Lord, how he deals with the devotees, and he quotes 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Danaham Tushata Kruran, so that those who are demonic are perpetually cast into the lowest pieces of material existence, and there's no chance for them to get my mercy. And there Prabhupada then explains, of course, that but the Lord's devotees are more merciful. So there is hope for anyone if they come in contact with devotees. And he quotes the famous example of Vasudev Dutt, for example, that he is ready to take on the sinful reactions of all the conditioned souls, as he declares to Lord Chaitanya. And so moving forward here, now Prabhupada writes that therefore the reprobate's only means of attaining any piety is through the association of devotees. We are looking forward to that time when the stalwart disciples of that illustrious crest jewel of all Vaishnavas, His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, having received the blessings of their spiritual master, will come together again for the benediction of the whole world, and without wasting any more time preach the message of Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Raghunath Das Goswami. So, and just briefly, so Prabhupada wrote that long time ago, so maybe in around 1950 or so. So long before he then took sannyasa and started his preaching. So, so Srila Gorakishore Das Babaji always tried to dissuade his disciple Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur from going to Calcutta, which he considered a bastion of Kali Yuga. Yet, though some might think that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur disobeyed his Guru's order, he preached not only in Calcutta but in other capitals of Kali Yuga, such as London, Berlin, Bombay, Madras and Delhi. He vehemently opposed the idea of constructing a temple in some quiet spot and leading a passive and uneventful life in the monastery. He represented perfectly the ideal of utilizing 100% of one's energy in God's service for the spiritual upliftment of humanity. A certain Gujarati friend offered to build him a temple in Vilpal, a quiet and remote section of Bombay. He immediately refused. He had the greatest good fortune of seeing him act and preach in this way. And now it is our ill fate that after the passing away of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the exemplar of Patita Pavana, we have returned to our lowly, fallen ways. Is there a glimmer of hope for our deliverance? From the ocean of loving compassion, I'll just finish it. From the ocean of loving compassion which had been completely dammed up, Lord Nityananda cut a candle of love of Godhead and flooded the entire world. And then some persons called Goswamis, claiming to be the Lord's descendants, again dammed up the ocean of mercy with their malpractices of fruitive activities and rituals. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur once more cut open the candle of love of Godhead and brought in the flood waters. Now, are we, of all persons, trying once more to dam it up like the Goswamis? By the influence of the good association of the Lord's devotees, even a fool and rascal like me, possessed of a destructive demonic mentality, can accumulate enough piety to become inspired to serve the Supreme Lord. So, Prabhupada first gives the example of his spiritual master's mood, of how determined he was to simply preach, and not knowing that as the prime desire of the Lord in regard to anything in this material world. And so much so that Prabhupada gives the example here that one Gujarati friend offered him to build a temple in a remote section of Bombay. And without hesitation, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur immediately refused. And before that, Prabhupada discusses the point that someone may even say that he disobeyed his spiritual master, Srila Gaurakishore Das Babaji Maharaj, who always tried to dissuade him from going to Calcutta, or to speak of any other, even more degraded places than where, as Prabhupada mentions here, where Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj went to preach. And Toshin Krishnapur also 2 days ago, right? Yeah. Discussed this point a bit about that the acharyas, that they do make changes sometimes, small details, and sometimes they are actually like major changes. But of course they never disobey actually the order of the spiritual master, because they perfectly know the heart of the parampara of the spiritual master and of the Lord, and thus they, according to time, place and circumstance, as we then see also so amazingly by Srila Prabhupada, that they are fully able to make the changes required to always get the best result for the parampara, for the Lord, which is especially in regard to preaching. And so that's why sometimes it looks even that they might go against the spiritual master, but actually they simply perfectly carry out his instructions, his desire. And then Prabhupada takes a very humble position of saying that actually it is his spiritual master Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur who had cut open this candle of love of Godhead again after the Goswamis had dammed it up. And and His Krishna Sri Kauvach Prabhu is present here now. He explained to us also recently about how Vaishnavism, especially for the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, that they didn't have a good reputation until Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, because of those Goswamis and so many other so-called devotees like Sakyapikis and so many names like Bhaktivinoda Thakur actually analyzed all of them elaborately, and Prabhupada quotes some of that in Chaitanya Charitamrita especially. And it was only then started by Bhaktivinoda Thakur who engaged intensely to establish again the position of Vaishnavism, of that devotees are not someone who dress weird or do any things just to please the senses, but they do everything to serve the Lord and thus to do the greatest service to humanity. And so even and Prabhupada himself, of course, here takes the position that that he would be among all those others who are not taking on that mission properly, but who are in that way again damming up the mercy. But of course, we know he was the one who then fully flooded it out into the rest of the world. But still, the mood of a disciple is that of, like Prabhupada. I'll read again the last sentence. He says that by the influence of the good association of the Lord's devotees, even a fool and rascal like me, possessed of a destructive demonic mentality, can accumulate enough piety to become inspired to serve the Supreme Lord. So he is thinking that only by his spiritual master's mercy is there any possibility of him getting any inspiration to serve the Lord. And I recently read in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam where the story of King Vena. I think all of you know how when after Dhruva Maharaj in his descendants, when it comes to King Anga, that he had a wife which had not such a fortunate not ancestry, like her father was death personified, and so that's why first and apparently King Anga's karma was such that he was not supposed to have a son at all. So only then when he requested the sage's presence when they had performed the sacrifice, but no one came, no one of the demigods, and not the Lord himself, and so then they ended up performing a specific sacrifice so that he would get a son, and so then a personality comes out of sacrificial fire, gives him oblations, and he gives that to his wife, and so she then does get a son, but that son unfortunately has all those qualities of his grandfather, maternal grandfather, and so he is right from childhood very sinful, and like even kills his playmates while playing and all those kinds of things. And still King Anga very puts lots of effort to trying to reform him, to trying to make him eventually a good king, a pious king, but he doesn't succeed. And so at one point he then gives up and takes it as the arrangement of the Lord to induce him to take the renounced order of life by being fully disgusted with with material life, trying to make his son a good person. And so he leaves for the forest, but which means then that at that time there's no one to rule the kingdom, and then that's the point I want to come to here, that there's like 3 times there, and that in Bhagavatam itself, that it always comes to the point that said that the sages there are always thinking for the welfare of the people. And Prabhupada in there's many purports again and again he reiterates the same point, that a true devotee is someone who feels for the people in general, who doesn't just care about his own life, not even just his own spiritual life. And Prabhupada even goes so far, I'm not sure if it's one of those purports or somewhere recently I read that he even, there's pure devotees that can be as, I forgot actually one of the names, but one of them is Bhajanandi, right? That those who simply are in a secluded place and fully absorbed in chanting the Lord's holy names and the Lord's glories, thinking of the Lord, and in that way are with the Lord, as we said, remembering and hearing it, so also directly associating with Him. So they are also pure devotees, as we know. They have no material desires. If they do it properly, they simply want to serve the Lord, want to be with the Lord. But Prabhupada goes even to the extent that he says that that a pure devotee, he doesn't just never just sit to a secluded place and think for his own spiritual life, but he always wants to act for the welfare of others, which seems like he's contradicting the Shastra, right? Because those are also can also be pure devotees, but again, he's as Acharya, as our founder Acharya, he knows perfectly well how to preach to us and how to give the Shastric knowledge. And so he understands the tendency, especially now in these ages, of people, as if we would hear of that yes, it is a possibility to just yourself be in a secluded place and chant, that he knows no one of us is qualified for that, and people would just misuse it and do whatever they like and not care for others. But also because without the special mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it's real spiritual upliftment is practically impossible for people in general anyway. And we know Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mood is also that of all our acharyas took on, of course, that of giving out the mercy as far as possible. And so only by engaging in that we can get the real mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and of Lord Nityananda, as Prabhupada points out here, that he is the one who cast open this candle of love of Godhead. And so Prabhupada knows how to preach to us, even if sometimes that might seem contradictory to the scriptures. Also, like the whole of Bhagavad Gita, we know it's Prabhupada always, even though Krishna does explain all these different forms of yoga, that Prabhupada always sometimes translates it directly into speaking about Bhakti Yoga. Again, because we know, because he knows that there's no point in us thinking too much about the other forms of yoga separately from Bhakti Yoga. And also he knows the heart of Krishna, and actually all forms of yoga are there simply to bring us to Bhakti Yoga. So that's why Prabhupada doesn't waste time and always directly point us to the ultimate direction that we need to look at. And so coming back to the pastime, so that's the first time when the sages then see that because there is no king, all the thieves and rogues come out and harass the whole society. And so then they, even against the advice of the ministers, they do install King Vina as the king. But of course he then does very simply exploits his position and harasses the people as well. And so then they even go to extend after advising him, and when he doesn't listen, then they kill him simply by chanting mantras. So there again Prabhupada quotes that yes, sages, even though generally they are aloof from material society and don't directly engage, but if needed for their welfare, they can even go to an extent to kill another person. And then again, after he's killed, and then again the thieves and rogues come, and then they famously churn first his thighs, from which comes a dwarf called Bahuka, who takes all the sinful directions of the body of King Vina, and then Maharaj Prithu and Atri, who is a Shakti Vaishyavatar. So we're on time now. If there's any comments, corrections, questions. Okay. Kantarachima Bhaktam Ki Jai. Prabhupada Ki Jai.